Tom is a long-time Surrey-based poet, and I met him many years ago when I started the Surrey Art Gallery, and we worked together, or he was a presenter at a sound thinking symposium, which is sort of the earlier version of this new media or media art symposium that marks today. A project we did called Writing the City in Verse, where we similarly brought different poets together and speakers, including Heather Haley, who's here with us today, and I worked on it with Pinder Dulé, who's in the back of the room. Many of you will know, a local poet, and really glad to see many of the participants here today. Tom has published many books of poetry, and I actually brought one just to show you that he's not just a video poet. He's a classic book poet as well, as many of these video poets are. And so Tom has also the author of the Videopoetry and Manifesto from 2011, which is in the gallery space along with the artwork, some of the excerpts from that, as well as a reprint of the Videopoetry Manifesto. He's been really central or a prominent voice in discussing video poetry and this relationship between image and text. And while I won't go into any more specific details, I know that he's more well known in many ways outside of Canada than he is in Canada. So we're trying to sort of adjust that and sort of correct that situation. But I know he's within many of the literary circles and video art circles. He's very well known. So it's really a pleasure and honor to be able to work with Tom again and on the exhibition and the symposium. So please welcome Tom Konyves.
Well, had I known that we would be here instead of at the art gallery, I would have written something about the role of chance in this art form, which is something I'll do next time. So it's called this talk is called Video Poetry and its metaphors. When filmmaker Werner Herzog was asked, "What made you want to pull such a monstrous ship hundreds of tons over a mountain in the jungle, a seemingly impossible task which became the central image in the film Fitzcarraldo," he answered, "Because it's a great metaphor." For what he struggled to say, he then suggested that it was an image dormant within us, within almost all of us, universally, and sometimes it needs a filmmaker or a poet to excavate it, to make it visible, to show it to the world, and make it a familiar item which belongs to the structure of visions. I would add that the world is not a stage, but it may be the only set of words that will come close to expressing how one feels about the world, or another set of words about video poetry, or about anything that needs to be excavated and made visible, shared with the world when we are feeling that we are the only one who can speak to that feeling. By calling upon a filmmaker or a poet to excavate it, Herzog may have been onto something more than he intended, because historically, whether it's a filmmaker or a poet, has made a difference where our art form is concerned. For the past 100 years, we have heard more from the filmmakers than the poets, that's for sure. The way I see it, it was in the 1920s when cinema was in dire need of a supporting metaphor so that it would be recognized as a true art form, in addition to architecture, painting, sculpture, music, theater, and literature. No better metaphor was available than poetry. In 1922, the Russian documentary filmmaker Dziga Vertov, whose film Man with a Movie Camera provided me with the title for our exhibition, Poets with a Video Camera, called for a decisive cleaning up of film language. for its complete separation from the language of theater and literature. But he also knew a good thing when he saw it, describing himself, "I'm a writer of the cinema. I'm a film poet. But instead of writing on paper, I write on the film strip." Vertov wanted it both ways. The prestige of poetry without the words of poetry. Jean Epstein, the French Impressionist filmmaker, echoed Vertov when he wrote of the cinema pur, pure cinema. He said, "The cinema is poetry's most powerful medium. Within 5 years, we will be writing film poems." Well, that never happened. It may not be the objective view that we expect from a critic or a theorist, but if Herzog is right, a certain kind of vision does need a filmmaker or a poet to show it to the world. I was such a poet. From the beginning, I wanted to see video poetry that, intentionally or not, would tell us more about itself as an art form, as if it were an existential question, what it should be and how it should distinguish itself. So I started to look for a good certain amount of self-consciousness, a gesture, a eureka moment, and what I was looking for was a good metaphor. A new art emerging is not an idle boast. Even today, with all the festivals dedicated to video poetry, added to the 7 or 8 established festivals in Europe, Argentina, South Asia, and the US, no matter where you go these days, which corner of the world, the question is always the same. What is video poetry, they ask us. You can take a stab at the answer, like you take this poem and you speak it or write it onto a medium like film or video, but the best we can hope for is a metaphor that works and will keep working for our audiences, working for future artists. In 1978, I completed my first video poem, Sympathies of War. It was in the spring of 1978. Later that year, in the winter issue of a mimeographed magazine called Montreal Journal of Poetics, I wrote, "I have come to gradually surrender my poetic powers to a medium which devours words as fire devours paper." A medium which devours words as fire devours paper. These were my first metaphors in defining the effect of what I had found in this new art form. In the year 1979, a new art was emerging, but video technology was not available to everyone. It certainly was not everywhere. The roots of video poetry are in experimental film, but experimental film had been losing interest in us ever since the 1920s dropped the ball after a few isolated attempts. There were a few. And yet poetry has come a long way since 1926. The many branches of poetry have reached out to us with sound poetry, concrete poetry, pattern poetry, vispo, langpo, vidpo, visual poetry, language poetry, film poetry, and of course video poetry, erasure poetry, even prose poetry, as paradoxical as that may sound. And video poetry has accommodated these, including homophonic poetry, as in Brandon Downing's work, which you should see in the gallery. Performance poetry, as in John Giorno's Just Say No to Family Values. E-poetry, as in Jim Andrews' Seattle Drift, who's here in our front row. Conceptual poetry, as in Mark Sutherland's poem in memory of Jack Donovan Foley, etc., etc. After World War II, the next generation of experimental filmmakers who came closest to the short form that was to be a feature of film poems and then video poems were led by Stan Brakhage and the structural materialist minimalist avant-garde who abandoned words, with some exceptions like Hollis Frampton, for the sake of what their supportive critics championed as a purity of filmmaking. Sound familiar? A cinema pur? Some Canadians, notably Michael Snow, investigated words as visual material, which eventually and indirectly influenced video poetry's use of text on screen as one of the prime testing grounds for word-image relationships. A prime testing ground for word-image relationships could be a metaphor for video poetry, as in Hubert Selecki's Unequal Brothers, Valerie LeBlanc's Splitting Image, and they are here today, and B.P. Nichols' Letter. A prime testing for word-image relationships. In 2015, the eminent professor, critic, theorist P. Adam Sidney published the book The Cinema of Poetry. It was advertised as a career-long fascination with the intersection of poetry, film, and the avant-garde. In his introduction, he writes the purpose of his project. I wanted to know the range of what had been thought, especially by filmmakers, on the nature of poetry, on its place in cinema. Especially by filmmakers, says it all. Sidney championed Stan Brakhage, who was one of the most important figures in 20th century experimental film. Brakhage, too, became a denier of words in film, rejecting the verbal in favor of the visual, who wrote in his fittingly titled book, Metaphors on Vision, imagine an eye unruled by man-made laws of perspective. Imagine an eye which does not respond to the name of everything. Imagine a world before the beginning was the word. Brakhage believed in poetry, but not in the words of poetry, not in his films. A new art emerging is not an idle boast, but it was not an easy birth. As early as 1953, the American experimental filmmaker Maya Derain contributes the metaphor of verticality, describing the way we perceive and identify the poetic moment in film. In poetry and the film, a symposium, just like this one, facing down her adversaries, Dylan Thomas and Arthur Miller, she said, poetry is a vertical investigation of a situation in that it probes the ramifications of the moment, so that you have poetry concerned not with what is occurring, but with what it feels like or what it means. Apply that to a video poem like Ralph Schmerberg's After Gray Days, in which a chaotic Sunday afternoon in a household is deconstructed from inside a balloon when the father decides to grab a vacuum cleaner and blow up a giant balloon. Unpredictably, the mother grabs the balloon, stretches the opening, and forces her head inside. Suddenly, silence fills the room. We see her head inside the balloon. Raised to the ceiling, to the sky, she begins to speak with a soft voice, reciting the words to Ingeborg Bachmann's poem, To Be Free for a Single Hour. Free, far away. And just like that, the subject is separated from the world by a poem. The case of Maya Derain is a curious one. Her 1943 Meshes of the Afternoon was described as a film poem, but text-image relations were never an issue because she, like her cinema pure predecessors, excluded the material presence of words displayed or voiced. There were other filmmakers who picked up on the metaphor of poetry as the vertical. Sergei Eisenstein compared the horizontal movement of film shots to the horizontal linear development of a melody in music, as opposed to the vertical orchestration that produces the effect of harmony. As a metaphor, word-image relationships are no different from human relationships, meaning sometimes they get along and sometimes they don't. They get along when they are totally aware of the other's potential as well as their own. And once you've realized that, you will always associate the images with the text of the work. They have become soulmates. As for the ones that don't get along very well, they weren't right for each other, were they? How easy it is nowadays with all the texts, especially pre-existing poems, and images available, all the manipulation software available to transform the look and sound to select just the right coupling or not to. It was in 2008 that I introduced the idea that the role of a video poet was to be a juggler, a visual artist, a filmmaker, a sound artist, and poet all combined, to juggle image, sound, and text so that their sometimes strange juxtaposition will create a new entity, an art object, a video poem, a poetic experience. The juxtaposition had to be strange. It could not be differentiated from any number of short narrative films. It could be differentiated from any number. The Russian formalists had a word for it, ostranenie, and they misspelled it on purpose just to make it even more strange. They passed over the analysis of content, going all in on the form. Don Quixote was not about the character of that name. The character was just a device for holding together different kinds of narrative techniques. In fact, I took their central idea and plastered it on our gallery wall. The technique of art is to make objects unfamiliar, to make forms difficult, to increase the difficulty and duration of perception, because the process of perception is an aesthetic end in itself and must be prolonged, which is, I guess, what I'm doing right now. There are more than 2 or 3 metaphors that can demonstrate the presence of what Clive Bell would call significant form when they try to describe this art form called video poetry. I will close this roundabout, this labyrinth, I hate to do this, leading hopefully somewhere to a beginning where we have 3 basic elements: text, image, and sound, which correspond perfectly to my all-time favorite metaphor for a threesome. As beautiful, there's the aesthetic connection, as beautiful as the chance meeting of a sewing machine and an umbrella on a dissecting table. And we haven't even touched upon the image as the context to the work. Our work is never finished, but I am. Thank you. Please welcome our distinguished keynote speaker, Sarah Tremlett.
Okay, yeah, I'm co-director of Liberated Words, which is a poetry film organisation and a website where you can go and find out more about poetry film, etc. First of all, this talk is going to be mainly about my progress across from conceptual research, sort of around 2005, on and going to sort of digital media conferences, and how my work's changed to more bringing in the voice and subjectivity. And actually poetry films are a good vehicle for expressing subjectivity, you know, people who can't have a voice. They're a very good medium, you know, since the rise of the internet. And you don't, you know, you can actually share different identities that way. So what I wanted to also do is talk about sound in relation to the poetry film and how I've used sound. And it's often not talked about really, or is seen as a kind of underpinning of a visual, you know, statement with the poem. But the sound is very important, and certain people really view sound as important, such as Enzo Minarelli, the polypoet Enzo Minarelli. But I'm not going to go into that now. So anyway, I just want to say thank you to Tom, to Jordan, to everybody, and pulling this together. And I keep on saying this could not have happened in the UK. I do not think to have transferred on a Saturday from one event to another. So I just, honestly, it would have been cancelled. So that's Canadians' view, I think. So anyway, I first encountered Tom at Bury Festival of Text in England in 2009, and he'd curated a screening, and he wanted one of my films in it, which you're going to see a bit of later. And that really changed my life, really, because I was working as an artist with film, and slowly then poetry film festivals were taking off. Zebra was in 2002 in Germany, but slowly, with digital media and the internet, festivals began to happen all around the world. And I sort of came into those, joining in those, like Video Bardo in Buenos Aires, for example. Yes. But first I want to talk about the book, because this came out in last year, 2021. And some of the people, like Valerie and Daniel, that image on the cover is from one of their films. There's over 40 contributors, which was important to me because it's not just my voice, it's my theory is woven through it. So it's a bit, some people have said it's a bit like a narrative, a story, because it starts with the history, the different strands that pull in to that history, even going back to the ancient Greeks and how there was visual poetry then, and how the lyric poem and the visual poem, how they can intertwine in the poetry film. And it's quite a unique concept if you think about it. The poetry film enables these different types of poem to come together. There's different strands, as Tom was saying, you have the visual poem, concrete poetry, the video poem, futurist, Dadaist influences, the experimental film poems of the 50s and 60s on the West Coast, in California, Chicago, the spoken word scene in the 80s, and so on and so on and so on. And suddenly, with digital media, we can just take all these influences and make something ourselves. So the three parts: form and structure. Basically, the book is about form. It's not about famous people who've won festivals, because festivals often are driven by winners. And this book isn't about them, although there are winning people in the book, but it's about form and about thinking about form. And I come mainly from an artist background. I think of the screen like a painting, a moving painting, and what's happening as the narrative progresses, let's say horizontally, and you have the graphic moment at the same time. What's going on there? And it's really a fascinating area. Also, the voice. There's lots of research to be done on the dialogic aspect of the voice in the poetry film. Where does it come from? It's like over the shoulder. If the person isn't on screen, there's a voiceover, but it's not. It's as if you're watching the thoughts of the artist. So it's a very interesting space. And in the book, there are people. There's a heavy sort of Spanish, Portuguese, Argentinian aspect to the book. There's Charles Olson. He interviewed quite a few Spanish and Portuguese video poets. The Argentinian Marisol Belusky wrote about Argentina from the political era through to Video Bardo, which started in the 1990, I believe, or 1996. And so there are all different aspects of looking around the world of what's happening. Thomas Sandegger, Carmichael Bell, he's given a good overview of films, poetry films from around the world. I was going to say something about the exhibition, but I'm just going to go and see it on Monday. I think it's going to be possible. Yes, I'll just move on to the next slide. So when to go back to my particular trajectory, so sort of around 2005, 5-ish, I was looking at, you know, the women artists particularly, such as Barbara Kruger and Jenny Holzer, and what they were doing with text as artists, and Jenny also working with poets. And they were the inspiration for me. Also, writers such as Summer Brodribb, Nothing Matters, a feminist critique of postmodernism, Carol Bigwood, Earth Muse, and Discovering Reality, Feminist Perspectives on Epistemology, Metaphysics, Methodology, and Philosophy of Science by Sandra Harding, because I was interested in the relationship between the text and the material on screen. It's quite conceptual thought, really, but that's what interested me. And you can see with Jenny Holzer what's happening with that text on the materiality of that building. There's something very interesting happening there, philosophically, in terms of language. And and I don't know how much that's been gone into even now, but so that was my area of research at the time. I'm going to try and play this. What I started working on was how text might dissolve on screen. Yeah. And I should have done that, sorry. And thinking about how it, you know, the individual letter, how it can appear and disappear, and that kind of liminal space. So I was sort of working on very minimal text-based films, quite short. And this one, it's text from a women's magazine, but it's also meant to, as the title says, it's meant to work through the seasons through colour. And the star sounds which come with it are from actual star sounds, which they've been altered, but they're meant to be actually from star sounds, which I got through a scientific contact. So I was also interested, what I was doing was I was looking at how poetry on the page, basically looking at cyclical prosody and the meter. So on this film, the star sounds were providing the meter, and the cyclical form was coming with the changing of the image. It's quite, but that's basically what I was working on. Can you remediate what's happening on a page onto a screen? So that's what I was doing with that. And this goes on for about, what's that music? So maybe I'll just move it on a bit. Okay. Stop it now. Anyhow, you get the basic idea. So if I can go on to the next slide. So, and along with that, my influences were people like Richard Kostelanetz with his minimal, the work he was doing. So, like if you think it's extending concrete poetry in a way, and often it was the early people working with computers, and mainly black and white, and you had some text, and it was just doing something a bit interesting. You know, I might say, you know, bombs away, and then it's dropping, that kind of thing, which I think was Kostelanetz, actually. And then obviously I was influenced by people like Aram Saroyan, who of course is quite a bit politically, he got into trouble a bit, didn't he, because he got an award, but that kind of a thing is what was interesting me at the time. So you can see where I was at. This is another of my films where the sound, again, I took some text from women's magazines and inserted where the words home and I, wherever they hit the top of the screen, because it scrolls, there'd be an error beep. And so it's a kind of, in a sense, there's a subjectivity in there, if you want to argue that. But at the time, I didn't really say that. So this was this was shown in a gallery space. You can imagine in a gallery space it echoing, and it takes on this sort of quality, chance quality. You know, when you hear rain, and there's a raindrop coming, dripping from a a gutter or something like that. And that's what I thought. I feel that the sound suggests some kind of subjectivity in relation to the words, or like you're out of the system, a kind of a system that isn't working. Whatever. Nobody has really, I think, taken this film and really written about it in the way that I would like them to. But anyway, I was doing a whole load of prints based around identity and voice, and this was shown at the same time as the prints in this gallery in Lithuania, actually. And in fact, it had quite a good, they were very interested in the whole idea of voice and subjectivity in Lithuania. And this was about 2010 or something like that. So and that's on a scrolling, you can have that going forever. If you're sitting in the gallery, it can drive you insane, but maybe that's what it's supposed to do. I don't know. So anyway, this next film, Some Everybody's, is in the exhibition. And it was shot over a year from a corner in Bath. So basically, there's a tourist site. There's the Royal Crescent just around the corner from that. And tourists would, right outside our window, would be stopping and taking pictures all the time and talking. And I filmed for a year and then took the footage and I disconnected any text that was identifiable to anybody, and the text scrolls up underneath. It seems to scroll up underneath the image if you see the film. And it's a series of dialogues from that site. And every time someone takes a photograph, and everything is slowed down, by the way, so you see people slowly walking by. The sound is very slow and blurry. And every time they take a photograph, it freezes for 6 seconds, I think. So that for me was just a commentary on the idea of the tourist, about reality. You take a picture, you've been there. Well, where have you been? And you haven't really been there, actually. Well, you have been there, but it's the corner. The dialogue comes from the corner. That was my from place, is what I was thinking. And everybody's conversations blurred into a poem, as it were, in the film. So I also made these postcards of the site wherever it was wherever it was frozen. So you had a picture that other people had decided, if you like, of the site. And on the back, there's a little poem. These are in the gallery as well. So that's quite really an idea about moving through, becoming, traveling, sightseeing. What is it? What do you achieve, in a sense, I suppose. The other big thing that I'm doing, as my work's moved on, I started writing the book in about 2013, and then as I saw more and more poetry films and got more involved in that, and as I was writing the book, I decided to go, and I was also doing family history research, and this film, Firewash, comes from that, and I've got different films from different places I've been to, really geopoetics of place, because my family mainly were farmers, or they worked the river, or they were miners, and in different places. And so this has taken 25 years to get to this point where I can make an overview and have films from different centuries, as it were, when it's just getting to the point now where poems, reference, and the films are all coming into one project that's going to be one thing that you can see in its entirety. But in the meantime, I'm showing films from different aspects. This particular one was about an ancestor from Cornwall who was a miner, and we went to stay at the site. There was a shepherd's hut on this site, and we went to stay at that place, and there was a storm. And I wrote a poem for that and made the film. So here we go again. Let's hope we get something here. I'll just show you a bit of this.
I am driven down, though limp from the shadow side, to the shepherd's hut by the lake, dug from springs for the farmer's son. A storm is coming. It is you, soul tossing and turning, compassing the leadening tool, buffeting the family stone circle. My system eye slowly undoes to natural language, scanning ditch, stream, rock, ore, stardust to bone, stone to dust, shafts of rain descend. Below, the black hum of picks meet leaping manganese bison from Neanderthal caves. You rumble signs.
Okay, so that's about 4 minutes long, probably. And then so more recently, I discovered that on my mother's side, my ancestors were they were bargemen on the River Thames, and this is something that my granny. Well, they didn't speak very much, my family, but my granny did not talk about this because, I think they thought it was something you didn't discuss. And I discovered this. And the actual place where the barge was and everything is there still, and the church on the river and so on. So, and it turned out that Whistler, the artist James McNeill Whistler, he was on the opposite bank on Chelsea. He was staying, and he used to get ferried out onto the Thames by the Greaves brothers, and he would paint that particular spot around Battersea Bridge, old Battersea Bridge. And I looked at it one day and I thought, well, that's weird because actually George would have been a bargeman at the time that he was doing this. And so so I thought, of course, obviously there's also family history involved, but I could project this idea that maybe that was George on the barge in Whistler's painting. And so I have written a poem to that, and I've made a film that includes this idea. And I'm going to be reading tomorrow at the poetry reading against that film, which hasn't got, it's only visuals at the moment. So that's just to show you what strange things can happen if you really delve into family history and what can come from it. And so this film, this is on a very different topic. I make films with the social side to them, and this film is about abuse, female suicide, particularly. Basically female suicide, and rather than taking it on directly, women who are in abusive relationships, about 200 women a year commit suicide in the UK from this, and I just connected up with Elizabeth Siddle, who committed suicide and was in a very imbalanced relationship at the time, and I thought, well, I wanted to make a poetry film about that. And people often take Ophelia, they take the subject of Ophelia and somehow think it's beautiful. Whereas in reality, when you look at Ophelia, that's a woman who's, at the end of her ability to carry on. So I had to take that to the end of that particular point, obviously, otherwise you wouldn't have seen what came from that. But all the discussions we're having around this event are really enriching and really needed to be had. So I think Tom's done something amazing. It's really a milestone, and for video poetry around the world. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah. We're going to have our Q&A at the end of all our presentations so we can fit everyone in. So I'd like to call upon, I'd like to start with Heather and Kurt. Where are you, Kurt? So Heather, I know from so long ago, 1999. We showed a video poem. We showed a video poem. Adeena showed a video poem at, was it called the Electrolit?
Yeah, it was a Vancouver Video Poem Festival.
Vancouver Video Poem Festival at the Video Inn. And we've been friends and associates and purveyors of video poetry throughout all the years. And she's done a tremendous job moving it from there to the Cinematheque, and we were always there for her year after year. And she, I think, you did 2 decades almost of screening. So her beginnings are tied in with Kurt's. Kurt Heintz is originally from Chicago, so I know him as a Chicago poet and videographer, and he has a marvelous piece by Patricia Smith reciting a poem called Chinese Cucumbers, and you have to come and see that. It's old school black and white, but it's a very moving performance piece. Kurt has been involved in a project that he was including Heather between Vancouver, Chicago, and LA. They would transmit the video signal, but you know what? I'm going to let them talk about that. So please welcome Heather Haley, Kurt Heintz. Thank you.
This is not going to be quite so theoretical as you've had with the previous speakers. It's sort of a rapid-fire timeline where we're commingling our experiences at Tom's behest to try to put this together into a single narrative. I don't think there's one narrative. I think there's like 38,000, but here we go. My timeline starts. October 1973. It's my homecoming game at my high school. I'm lucky enough to have access to a computer. My teacher runs statistics on his home teams. I'm there, though, because the computer's open, and that's something I want. I wrote a program that is supposed to generate poetry. It does. It sucks. But it works. August 1978. I get my first computer, my own computer for once, an Apple II. I write a paint program for it that ultimately digitizes video. I share the program with my art teacher. She shares it with her boyfriend, who then publishes a top-selling paint program for the Apple II. I question my teacher. She says my work is academic and therefore outside copyright. Thus begins my adversarial relationship with the Academy. The video output on my Apple II points me to television production, which I study and I end up loving. Okay, this is for you.
Yeah, okay. Yes, in 1980, I was a singer and songwriter for one of the first all-female punk bands in Vancouver called the Zealots. And I abandoned everything and moved to Los Angeles, absolutely certain of rock stardom, the hubris of youth. That's all. Yeah. And then
Okay, and back. Doing. This is you too.
Yeah, along with writing songs and fronting a band, I fully engaged in LA's diverse and vibrant art and coffeehouse scenes, while working at the LA Weekly and the Woman's Building, a feminist gallery in Mecca. An autodidact, I learned by doing about performing, writing, poetry, publishing, video, installation art, spoken word, performance art, and collaboration. Inspired by the city's rampant pollination between genres and disciplines, exposed to and influenced by the likes of Judy Chicago, Brandon Miller, Johanna Wendt, Rachel Rosenthal, the Guerrilla Girls, Grunk, and Judy Baca.
There we go. Girl power.
That's right.
All right. 1982 and later. I'm a bench tech at Western Electric in the Chicago suburbs, but I joined the Center for New Television, also in Chicago, where I attend workshops and video art screenings. I meet video artists such as Stana and Woody Vasilka and Bill Viola. This is way better than art school. It's a lot cheaper too. Video art is real, but any such video art with a voice resembling poetry that I encountered there is simply called, oh, that's narrative. It's you.
From 1982 to 87, I published with Peter Haskell and published the innovative and experimental poetry journal Rattler. I believe this was my first attempt at fusing text with image. It featured a parade of LA luminaries such as Linda Gerbino, Georgianne Dean, Rocky Schenck, Jonathan Rosen, Mark Mothersbaugh, Lydia Lunch, and Perry Farrell.
Love Lydia Lunch.
Who doesn't?
This is awesome.
All right. In 1984, I met Doug Knott, poet and Beyond Baroque Lhasa Club impresario, who would later produce video poems and a cable show called Poetry TV. Also, I believe the Olympics Art Festival in 1984 engendered an explosion of artistic expression. I believe its fallout had a direct impact on the city's culture, along with me and many fellow artists.
It's 1986 in January, and I discovered a place called Butchie's Get Me High Lounge. It's home to Mark Smith's weekly poetry open mic. At the time, we call this kind of stuff performance poetry. Performance first is our credo. When this gig moves to a place across town called the Green Mill, I witness the genesis of slam poetry, and I receive a wild bar-side education on creative writing. No video, few books, but lots of voice.
This is my first computer.
Here you go.
Yeah. In 1987, I bought my first computer, a Mac SE, and to run the office of the Ethical Pool, a recording studio in Silver Lake. And yeah, it took a long time.
So what took you so long?
I told you I'm not a geek.
Well, there we are. All right. 1990 in December, I bought the previous year an SVHS tape. SVHS, guys, do you know your video? How old that is? I see a lot of folks saying, no, okay, you're 30-something. I buy an SVHS videotape editing system, so I create video and perform poetry for a suite of things I call On Division. That's Division Street in Chicago, at a gallery called Wholesome Rock. It's about the dark side of gentrification and the rise of HIV. Susan James, a poet and licensed nurse, lucky me, draws a sample of my blood, which the audience sees in close-up over multiple monitors. I press the sealed, warm test tube against the cheeks of the front row guests and whisper in their ears, "What do you feel through the glass?" Okay, this will be you.
You talked about this on your TV, right? I attended telepoetry events at the Electronic Cafe in Los Angeles. And it was founded by Kit Galloway and Sherry Rabinowitz in Santa Monica. And I witnessed my very first videophone link-ups with Boston, New York, Phoenix, and Paris, and I met poet and facilitator Marilyn Murphy.
Yes. And that's another glimpse of what the Electronic Cafe looks like, albeit in low resolution, because that's what you could get in digital pictures in the day. In 1991, in June, I am part of an ensemble called the Loofah Method that includes poet Sin Salach, one of Mark Smith's circle, and musicians and filmmakers. I add the video component to Salach's live performance poetry. Patricia Smith and I have already become good friends, and we are both fans of this ensemble, the Loofah Method. When we reminisce about our shows, we sing to each other, "I'm your TV." That's how it goes. There really is a song. There's a piece called "The Night I Married My Television Set," which I can't get in this show. I don't have time. But she's like going down the aisle in a gown and her husband has got a TV head. Anyway, let's see. This is 1996. Let's see, 91.
Through 6.
Loofah Method 9108. There we go.
Yeah.
CNTV, Center for New Television. Thank you. I'm now in sync again. Center for New Television now reports on the poetry video. Michael War, executive director of the Guild Literary Complex, gives us his blessing. I work with Quraish Ali Lansana and Larry Winfield to present the Guild's first poetry video festival. We show videos to an audience at a nightclub called the Hot House. The audience loves it. We're sort of gutsy. We're Chicagoans, right? Okay. So that's how we collect our stuff. Larry made a video of his own with his Radio Shack TRS-A computer. We are definitely not doing bicoastal things, but we're sort of slugging it out. Heather, I think this is yours, 92.
Yep, it's really brief. I was introduced to the internet, of course, a life-changing event, or the World Wide Web, which we called it back then, and it was I learned HTML, and it was all very exciting.
And this is, let's see, 92 September. The Guild's second poetry video festival features Bob Holman, who has also become part of Mark Smith's circle. This guy has a way of pulling people in. This festival is a lot more curated. It ain't just friends. Open calls bring us jewels as well as crap for submissions. And friends, if you have to look at a random pile of tapes of poetry video, I'm seeing nodding faces.
I know the name
You
of
know
that too.
the experience, like, no, please fast forward, but you still have to write something down. We then get Jean Howard, then comes back from Los Angeles at a time. I was unaware of what was going on out there. She too is a friend of Mark Smith. Brings me news of the Electronic Cafe International and Marilyn Murphy. For the next festival, that's in the coming year, 1993, we team up with the Center for New Television, and Marilyn hosts a poetry workshop with us by videophone, and that is the videophone that we use. Did anybody ever used to have a CD player portable? That's kind of the size it is. And we would get 3 video frames a minute, and they were slow scan, very slow. Tom published a clip I had, and look at Facebook, look at Tom's feed. There was one clip I got out of this thing that's actually good, and that went on Facebook just in the last day. I'm really grateful. Thank you, Tom. Is that back to me? Oh my God. 92, December. I connect with the San Francisco Poetry Film Festival and discover a then 17-year history of poetry and cinema there. I hold my own, scoring prizes for 2 of my videos. Now it goes to Heather.
Yeah, I remember the image would take at least 10 seconds to slowly scroll down.
If it came in intact.
Yeah, and then you'd always have to get a venue with two phone lines, one for video, one for audio.
You couldn't.
It's really fun.
This is before the internet.
Talk about fraught.
Yeah.
Yes, in 1993, the Art of Connecting People awarded an explorations grant by the Canada Council. I founded the Edgewise Electorate Centre in Vancouver with a mandate of employing technology, the internet, and new media to advance the work of poets and artists. We procured Netscape, set up a website, and having been raised with television and moving images, working with video came naturally, as I employed a camera to document events, produce telepoetics link-ups, and video poems. Video's history of experimentation is a fundamental aspect of the medium, and its populist nature always appealed to me. Accessibility and affordability are important considerations as well. And as Robert Graves said, there is no money in poetry, but then there's no poetry in money either. Some participants included Robert Bringhurst, Evelyn Lau, Sherry D. Wilson, Gregory Schofield, Larissa Lai, Roger Blenman, Adeena Karasick, Lillian Allen, Kate Braid, Wade Compton, Bill Bissett, Bud Osborne, Pinder Dulé, Marilyn Dumont, Billy Nickerson, Patricia Smith, and Henry Ma.
Coming back. January of 1993. I make a few more poetry videos with Lisa Buscani, a member of the Neo-Futurist Ensemble. Their byline is like 30 plays in 60 minutes. Sudden drama. And again, also with Sin Salach. The Lufa Method performances with Salach have now moved from little scrubby places, sound stages or whatever we could get, to a real theater called Live Bait. We ask Sun-Times critic Hetty Weiss to see us. She comes, she watches our show, but she refuses to review us because she says our poetry, quote, has no conflict and therefore no drama. Baloney, Hetty.
Wow.
There we go. But I mean, that's what you do when you slug it out with theater critics.
Yeah.
1993, American Film Institute awards me a prize, lucky me, for a poetry video. See, I say poetry video, Tom says video poetry. Think the same thing. Okay, I'm a Chicagoan, I got semantic issues. Okay, let's just say that. There we go. That I had to enter in. I entered this poetry video in the AFI's music video category for a competition called Sony Visions of US. AFI did not recognize poetry video. So music video was the next best category. It took a prize. Marilyn Murphy, there she is, attends the reception. This is like earth-moving to me because she's such a force of nature. After so many voice and video calls, I finally get to meet her in person. And by the way, I came in second place in this competition to a group of LA rappers dressed as cowboys. They really did music, and so they adhered to the form best. And the late Bob Saget gave out the awards. That has nothing to do with our art.
That's pretty funny.
There we go.
May he rest in peace.
May he.
Okay, yeah, so in 1994, we did our very first Edgewise Electorate Center event, a telepoetics link-up with Los Angeles at the Western Front in Vancouver. The EEC spawned three major programs: the Edgewise Cafe, one of Canada's first online multimedia magazines, Telepoetics, and the Vancouver Video Poem Festival, which evolved into Visible Verse at the Cinematheque.
I'm going to fast forward because we're short on time. There's so much stuff to talk about. There's a lot of stuff here going on. I'm going to go to this particular entry, which I think is kind of poignant. If I can find the Columbine one.
Well, I think you just passed that image.
I did.
Mm-hmm.
There's passage, L's, blank. There we go. In 1999, in May, I joined Heather in a video phone link-up between Vancouver and Chicago with high school poetry students. My kids are with an organization called Young Chicago Authors. This is in the aftermath of the Columbine shooting. Chicago kids complain about not being allowed to talk about Columbine in class. And they talk about metal detectors on their way into school. This leaves Heather's Vancouver kids dumbfounded. And never has the difference between Americans and Canadians been so sharp for me. Let's go to your conclusion if we can.
Yeah, well, sadly, that's changing.
Do you want to take that?
Yeah, this is the visible verse, right?
It's like
the last,
coming at the last step.
see or be seen, right? I
Yep.
talked about that. Yeah, we launched the Vancouver Video Poem Festival, the first festival of its kind in Canada. From the program, the hybrid genre has received scant attention despite being a creative field of growing interest for Canadian poets and artists since the 70s. Vancouver's Edgewise Electorate Centre is hosting the inaugural event wherein the most innovative treatments are explored and presented. Work from Canada and beyond will give local audiences a survey of the accomplishments in video poetry for the past 20 years. When asked repeatedly to define video poetry, I answered, a wedding of word and image. But to me, the bottom line is language. Word language artists. An emphasis in a video poem is language, not personality. Language in all its guises, including text, voice, image, and sound. Their integration, the greatest challenge. Yeah, and that's when I met Tom, 1999.
And that's our somewhat abbreviated program for you guys. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if I can cut to that. So she's a New York-based poet, performer. Her books are on the table over here. You're going to have, this is a real treat for us to have her in town and performing. We love her, boys and girls, performing the title poem, Checking In, which is at the gallery. You got to check it out there. There's a long version there. This is going to be a shorter version. Produced by Jim Andrews, sitting in the front row here. And it's playing at the foot of the ramp leading to the gallery, at our gallery. For your viewing and listening pleasure, you get to see her live. I'm so pleased to present Adeena Karasick.
Ulysses is listening to Siren Song on Spotify. Bartleby just checked in at Scribner's. Marshall McLuhan is rocking out to the global village people. BP is filling up at BP. Moses Maimonides is launching the Hitchhiker's Guide for the Perplexed. Herman Melville is listening to Hootie on the Bluefish. William Wordsworth is wandering lonely on iCloud. Jean Baudrillard is reading Beyond the Looking Glass. Jacques Derrida's glass is half full, but his copula runneth over. Alfred Hitchcock is listening to Counting Crows. J. Alfred Prufrock uploaded 1,000 insects to his wall. Dorothy Wordsworth is listening to Shakespeare's sister. Gertrude Stein and Alice B. Douglas are listening to Twisted Sisters. Jacques Lacan just checked in at The Gap. Emmanuel Kant is listening to No Doubt. HD is now available in HD. Abraham Abulafia is listening to My Alchemical Romance. Toulouse and Guattari are listening to Rage Against the Machine. Nirvana is reading Doom of Youth. Salome is listening to The Talking Heads. The Mechanical Bride is listening to White Wedding. Walter Benjamin is listening to Arcade Fire. Bertolt Brecht has verfremded himself. Bill Bissett and Slavoj Žižek are awake in the red desert of the real. Einstein is on the beach. Al Baghdadi is listening to P. Diddy. Puff Daddy is reading Big Data. Pharaoh is reading Content's Dream. Marshall McLuhan is playing Technopoly. Neil Postman always rings twice. The Cure and Poison are reading The Pharmacon. Anais Nin is drinking gin. Kurt Schwitter is saying it with stickers. Marie Antoinette disabled her cookie cookies, but is eating cake. Gustav Klimt is listening to Kiss. Edvard Munch is watching Scream 3. Olivia Newton-John and Kubla Khan just checked in at Xanadu. Salvador is doing the time warp again. John Cage is listening to the sound of silence. Thomas Edison is singing the body electric. Pictures from Bruegel just added a new photo. Hans Arp lost his sculpture in the forest, but George Berkeley can hear it. Klaus Oldenburg is reading A Movable Feast. In and Out is now serving floor burgers. A rose is a rose is a rose, emerald say lovely, blue hydrangea, and a host of golden daffodils just posted in 80 flowers. Mrs. Dalloway likes 80 flowers and is buying them herself. King Ubu just checked in at Nobu. Emily Dickinson is playing solitaire. Call me Ishmael, call me maybe. I, Claudius, like I, Maximus Nude, is descending a staircase to heaven. Walter Benjamin and Benjamin Button are marching backwards into the future. Robert Frost and Jack Kerouac are on the road, not taken. Descartes is before the horse. Horace is with an Hinny stallion and a she-ass. Alfred Krasipsky is binding his chime. Emily Dickinson and Walt Whitman shared a narrow fellow in the leaves of grass. Robert Duncan is returning to a meadow. Tristan Zara is shopping at Zara. Tristan and Isolde are shopping at Tristan and America. America is becoming great again, buying strophes at $250 a piece, 500 down on its old strophe. Allen Ginsberg is shopping for peaches and penumbras. The plums are no longer in the ice box. The palm wine drinker likes all the whiskey in heaven. Gita Tila is drinking tequila. Minka Bakhtin is at Harlequin's Carnival. John Bard is listening to Funhouse. Plato is listening to Moonshadow. The law of the excluded middle shared no medium. Marshall McLuhan is getting his medium massaged. Western Wind shared 400 blows. Little Red is in the hood. One Direction and One Perception are moving. Instanter Eden is coming slowly. Barbara Kruger is thinking of you. Ella Choque is trimming her mustache. Sasha Mazok is listening to Sucker Punch. Smash Mouth is listening to the Violent Femmes. Venus de Milo is reading A Farewell to Arms. George Sand is with the Woman in the Dunes. Beowulf is playing Dragon Slayer. Clara is in hell. Bob Hope is springing eternal in the human breast. Igor Stravinsky is reading Spring and All. The likes There Is No There. Anna Karenina is listening to Train. Gregor Stanza is bugging out. Frank O'Hara and William Burroughs shared naked lunch poems. Lydia Lunch is having my dinner with Andre. A solitary reaper likes a room of one's own. Michel Foucault likes a room with a view. Pee Wee Herman likes Pee Wee Glissando, Lysandra, and Tatiana like Love Potion. Number 9, Cyclops is listening to the Beastie Boys. Mary Shelley is listening to Rob Zombie. Medusa is watching Snakes on a Plane. Helen Sixu likes this and is laughing. Elvis has left the building. Medea is with you in the city. Bella Swan is dancing Swan Lake on Swanee River, Swan's Way. Charles Bernstein is doing it his way. T.S. Eliot is listening to Sometimes It Snows in April. The King of May is feeling August. January, the Merchant and the Merchant of Venice just checked in at Goblin Market. Dylan Thomas is going gently into that good night. Gertrude Stein is going clearly to pieces. Robert Creeley likes pieces and is counting them. 1 and 1, 2, 3. The river merchant's wife and the wife of Bath are now friends. Ruby Tuesday is reading Thursday as Sunday. Tommy doesn't know what day it is. Shylock is in for a pound. Charles Resnikov is not buying it for a penny. Geraldo de Campos is telling it slant. Screaming is coming across the sky. The sky is the color of television. Jack Kerouac is using poetry instead of the telephone. Hugo Ball is using his BlackBerry Bimba. Brother Dove is minding the store. Bella Shreve is with Belle de Jour reading the Bell Jar. La Belle Dame Saint-Merci is reading a novel of thank you. Nobody is putting baby in the corner. Don Juan, Don Quixote, Don Julio, and Delta Don like the battle Don pink as the fresh bitten thigh of a maiden. Starlight Night is with Midnight's Children. The Psychedelic Furs are listening to the Pet Shop Boys. Venus in Furs is listening to Fur Elise. Mr. Oolalt is on holiday. Billie Holiday and Holiday Golightly prefer the blues. Charles Bukowski is bathing every vein in Swiss liqueur. Lee Miller is bathing in Hitler's bathtub. Eli Wiesel just tagged in the deserted village. The Barbara Seville was just tagged with the uncut hair of graves. The Accent Grave is digging it. Walt Whitman is waiting for a response. Walt Whitman is waiting for a response. Walt Whitman is waiting for a response.
Hola, mi nombre es Javier Robledo, poeta, realizador audiovisual, performer y productor cultural, nacido en Argentina en 1962. Soy fundador y director de Video Bardo, archivo y Festival Internacional de Videopoesía desde 1996 al día de hoy. Primero quiero agradecer a Tom Konyves, que me ha seleccionado para esta muestra y esta disertación, y a la Surrey Art Gallery por la exposición. En primer lugar, quiero aclarar que me considero básicamente un poeta, es decir, alguien que busca la poesía y que quizás en alguno de esos intentos la encuentra, o mejor dicho, alguien que es encontrado por la poesía porque ella decide atravesarlo, no por mérito propio. En esa concepción utilizo diversos lenguajes de la poesía: el lenguaje verbal, el lenguaje visual, el lenguaje audiovisual, el lenguaje corporal, produciendo así poemas escritos y recitados, poemas visuales, videopoemas y performances poéticas. No soy un teórico de la poesía, sino un práctico. Me fascina hacer poesía. Desde allí hablaré, más que desde un lugar teórico. A continuación les presento mi esbozo sobre el tema que me convoca, que es la performance videopoética y la videopoesía performática. En primer lugar, quiero diferenciar ambos conceptos. Por un lado tenemos la performance videopoética, que es una acción performática en vivo, en la cual se incluye de forma más o menos protagonista el lenguaje audiovisual poético. Por otro lado tenemos la videopoesía performática, que es una obra monocanal o multicanal o instalación en la cual se proyecta un videopoema en el cual la performance aparece como protagonista del mismo. Ambas surgen desde la performance poética, a la cual se suma luego lo audiovisual. Yendo a un desarrollo histórico, considero que la performance poética nace el día en que el primer ser humano, hace 300.000 años, recitó un texto poético en voz alta. Probablemente eso haya sucedido en el marco de algún ritual primitivo. Desde allí quedó demostrado que no hay poesía sin cuerpo y no hay poesía sin acción. El recitado implica acción por el uso del aparato fónico, boca, lengua, laringe, etc. y el uso del resto del cuerpo, postura de parado, sentado, movimientos, gestos, etc. Desde aquel entonces, en diversas culturas, se habrá recitado poesía en forma performática, algunas de las cuales tenemos registros históricos, como las representaciones poéticas de los antiguos griegos, por ejemplo. Recién hace 8.000 años aparecen expresiones de protoescritura y luego sistemas de escritura organizados. El acto de escribir se revela entonces también como una performance, ya que implica el movimiento de la mano, el brazo y todo el cuerpo. Esta dimensión de acción de la escritura la encontramos explorada y desarrollada por el arte de la caligrafía en el Antiguo Oriente y también en Medio Oriente. Yendo a la performance audiovisual, a la acción, se agrega aquí la proyección de imágenes en movimiento relacionados con el poema. Encontramos las primeras expresiones históricas de performance audiovisual en vivo en el siglo III a.C. en Indonesia. Mediante la técnica de teatro de sombras de marionetas sobre tela, utilizando fuego como fuente lumínica, se recitan poemas con música en vivo. Poemas rituales hindúes como el Mahabharata y el Ramayana se representaban en estas primeras expresiones audiovisuales performáticas. Hasta el día de hoy se siguen realizando estas performances audiovisuales ritualmente, utilizando fuego como fuente lumínica. La performance videopoética sigue su desarrollo histórico. Muchos años más tarde, los futuristas y los dadaístas rescatan esta tradición performática y le dan nuevos significados y formas expresivas, valiéndose también de nuevos medios tecnológicos. Video performances de Hugo Ball y otros dadaístas han quedado registradas de aquellos movimientos. Con la aparición del cine nace la proyección monocanal, que ya no es en vivo. En el cine, también la actuación y la performance llegan con nueva expresividad al lenguaje audiovisual. Luego, con la aparición de la tecnología del video, se hace aún más popular esta estética al tomar el nombre de video performance y video performance poética o videopoesía performática, desarrollado por numerosos artistas hasta el día de hoy. En lo que a mí personalmente me concierne, desde la primera vez que sentado en una mesa leí un poema en vivo, comprendí que aún esa forma tradicional de recitado era una acción que implicaba una puesta en escena del poema, con todos los lenguajes que implica una puesta en escena. Decidí entonces explorar esa dimensión escénica y performática del poema al ser leído en vivo. A su vez me interesó la posibilidad de que esa acción podría ser radicalmente transformada por la puesta de cámara audiovisual y por la edición. Por lo tanto, encontré en la performance videopoética y el videopoema performático una forma de expresión que me permitía gran posibilidad. Mi primer performance videopoética la realicé trabajando con un mimo en vivo. La obra se llamaba The Session, presentada en 1990 en el Teatro Vitral en Buenos Aires, Argentina. Luego realicé varias obras de videopoesía performática, comenzando con la tecnología VHS de aquella época. En muchas ocasiones he realizado un recorrido a través de 3 tipos de obras que se iban transformando la una en la otra. Partía de un objeto poético realizado por mí como poema visual objeto. En segundo lugar, tomaba ese objeto y realizaba una performance con el mismo en diversos espacios o lugares, espacios que afectaban radicalmente la performance, además de que la misma siempre variaba. Y en tercer lugar, filmaba la performance con diferentes puestas de cámara en diversos lugares para luego transformarla aún más mediante efectos, cortes, fundidos, sonorización y otros recursos de la edición audiovisual, obteniendo así un videopoema performático. Por lo tanto, encontré una forma muy interesante. Así, la evolución se resume en 3 obras: objeto visual, performance y videopoema performático. Este es el caso de poesía, que surge de plasmar esas letras coincidiendo con las 6 caras de un cubo de piedra o adoquín de calle, concretando así un objeto poético. Luego la realización de la performance en vivo y por último el videopoema performático. También disfruté mucho de esta triple transformación con mis obras Antología Poética, Samsara, Yo y Senda Peatonal, en sus versiones objeto, performance y videopoema performático. En algunos casos, doy el objeto poético a otro poeta o artista para que haga con él la performance que él desea, y yo filmo y realizo luego el videopoema sobre su performance. Por ejemplo, con mi objeto poético Senda Peatonal, varios artistas trabajaron con él. La versión de Tom Konyves, caminando sobre la senda peatonal en la piscina de mi casa, es más que notable, y titulamos el videopoema Entro y Salgo. Otro factor interesante es el hecho de que estas 3 obras tienen características diferentes. El objeto poético es una obra fija y atemporal, o sea, en la cual el tiempo no incide. La performance, por el contrario, es temporal y a la vez efímera. Y el video poema es fijo pero temporal, o sea, afectado por el tiempo que el autor determina en el video. Estas son algunas de las razones por las cuales encuentro en la videopoesía performática tantas posibilidades expresivas, al incluir objetos, performance y el lenguaje audiovisual. Hay ejemplos de muchos autores que han trabajado en este sentido con resultados poéticos sorprendentes y disfruto mucho de ellos también. En cuanto al futuro del género, creo que los avances tecnológicos hacen que la videopoesía performática y la performance videopoética tengan un mañana provisorio lleno de nuevas expresividades. Bueno, hasta aquí me he explayado en varios conceptos y definiciones. Por ello quiero terminar aclarando que el concepto, la definición, es un escobazo de aprendiz de brujo con el cual enjaulamos la pluma del pájaro mientras el ave sigue volando. Sigue volando. Sigue volando.
see our bodies. Behold.
Hi there, I'm Matt Mullins. Thank you for having me. I'm here to talk to you today about 2 or 3 things one should know about video poetry, or this is the way it happens. First, I'd like to talk to you about our bodies. Our bodies was born in a bit of a fever dream. I was surfing YouTube one day. I came across footage of Oral Roberts delivering this sermon, and it occurred to me that inside this sermon from this early 20th century televangelist, there was actually a humanist poem. So what I did was I transcribed the entire sermon. And then I looked for that poem. I tried to carve the statue out of the block of marble. Once I had all those phrases down and I had created my poem, I then took all the corresponding clips in which he speaks those phrases and I lined them up. What I found was visually interesting, but it was missing something. I watched it repeatedly, looking for ways to try to bring more visual interest to it. I noticed that Oral Roberts has a very gesticulative way of speaking. And because of that, I thought, there's a certain kind of visual dance going on here. And I wanted to bring it into the poem as a kind of counterpoint, because I had remixed Roberts in such a way that I was now making him speak my poem. And I wanted to be careful not to mock his notions of Christianity and patriarchy and monotheism. I just wanted to show that underneath those dogmatic ideas that essentially prescribe a particular worldview, there really is a certain kind of openness in play. And who is at the heart of that? We are human beings. Another piece I'd like to talk to you about today is the video poem Semi-Automatic Pantoum. This is a piece for which I was approached by the Poetic Justice League of Chicago. They were asking me to create a companion video poem to go with the poem that they had written as a group to speak out against the scourge of mass shootings and gun violence that have been happening here in the United States and have been exponentially becoming more deadly and more horrifying and a greater problem. So they sent the poem my way. It's definitely something that I feel strongly about and wanted to support them doing. And upon reading the poem, the first thing that occurred to me was the idea that I wanted to shoot this poem. And I don't mean I wanted to shoot it with the camera. There are bullets in this poem, so best if you stay home. So I went out to my friend's house, who's a responsible gun owner, and we went out onto his back 60 acres and set up some targets with about 20 copies of the poem on them, and we shot the poem as I shot the poem. And here's one of the poems that I shot. I was already thinking rhythmically about the piece and how the gunshots, the sound of the gunshots would be used as kind of a basic rhythmic core of the piece to create the beat. And I went out and I found some footage of mounted machine guns. And I decided I'm going to slow that down. I'm going to slow that down to get it to be the tempo that I want it to be. And though I found it interesting, I knew I needed things to counterpoint it. I went to split screen, as I often do in some of my work. I'm always trying to create juxtapositions. I find interesting ideas come into play in the space between an image and a word or 2 images, and I wanted to work with that notion a little bit, and I started thinking about ways to put these things together. I also found some footage from a public service announcement about gun violence. It's interesting footage in that it's a bullet coming across the screen and piercing various objects, a bottle of ketchup, a watermelon, an egg, these things exploding in a way that evokes a human being being shot. I wanted to speak to that, so to do that I created this center section of the poem, which is silent. There is no rhythmic pounding of the machine gun or waltz-like dance of the 22. Pulled that sound out. Then I move into the last part of the poem, which a lot of that involves kind of a scrolling down of the page itself as it's being shot. But it's like text on screen. You're seeing the words of the poem on the page as you're hearing them recited, but you're also watching them be pierced by bullets as you're hearing them. Which I thought was a pretty interesting movement and pretty direct statement about what was happening in our country. And then from there, to get to the end of the piece as kind of an outro, I found this fourth type of footage, which is essentially a kind of jingoistic, patriotic, public service film from, I think it's probably from the 1950s, where it's basically talking about American unity and how we the people are as strong as a chain, and we will stand together, and we're only as strong as our weakest link. And I looked at that with the audio off, with the thought of everything that I had just putting together before it, and I thought that the subtext of that particular film emerged in interesting ways when juxtaposed against what had come before it. It had become ironic. It spoke to the problem rather than some false idea of unity. And I found that to be kind of a nice denouement, I suppose. And that's the way semi-automatic Pantone happened. I literally shot a poem. I found some footage of a machine gun. I found a public service announcement. I found some old footage from a patriotic 50s film trying to talk about American unity. I combined all that with a poem that had been given to me that speaks out against gun violence. I looked for rhythmic ways to combine all these elements in a way that I thought spoke most directly to the issue at hand. I did it all in iMovie and GarageBand. Any footage that I shot on my phone. I put it all together on my laptop. My most recent video poem, America, I Want to Make You Something Beautiful, but I Failed. Essentially, it was my reaction to what happened on January 6th. I had thought about it a lot, but hadn't thought about it in an artistic sense. And I saw Allen Ginsberg's book, Howl, sitting on my reading table. I just picked it up and started reading it. And I came to the poem America, and something struck me. You know, this was Allen Ginsberg talking in 1956 about the state of his mind and the corresponding state of the country. So there's an intertwining between what's happening politically and socially at that moment and what's going on with him personally. And as I read the poem, I thought, this needs an update. This needs to be said again in a new way that speaks to the current moment. I went through the entire poem line by line and had a few goals with each line. I wanted to replicate both the rhythm and the sense of the line. So I would replicate the rhythm of the line in a way that was consistent with the original line, and I would look for what I felt was the sense of the line, the central point that I thought Ginsberg was trying to get at with a particular line. And then I would try to rephrase that line in a modern context in a way that was specific to my life. So I think in that regard I used Ginsberg's poem as a kind of imprint. I wasn't trying to imitate it, I was trying to emulate it while staying true to its spirit and saying something unique. I knew when I was writing it that I wanted to be with the poem. I started thinking, how do I get this across? So I started looking online for footage that I thought would correspond to what's going on in the poem, and I found some footage of a family visit to Washington, D.C. from what appears to be the 1940s. Visiting Washington, D.C. is an archetypal American experience. Families take their children to the nation's capital to show all its historic buildings and all the historic places, to show them the seat of power and democracy and all these things that our capital represents. So I have this footage, and it features all the monuments, all the things you would expect. And I took that footage, and I was going to use it as the backdrop of this piece. And then I thought, I'm going to overlay things on top of it. So I went and looked for other footage that I thought spoke to the moment. There was footage of Donald Trump's smarmy, snarling face. There was footage of TikTok kids doing dancing. I had some footage of some news footage of some insurrectionists. I had an old advertisement from the 1960s that was kind of psychedelic. Basically what I had was this vacation footage, starting the piece out, and then one by one, each of these other 4 pieces would pop up and take them over. And when I got through the first draft of it, I felt, okay, this is pretty good. And then I talked to some people whose opinion I respect, and they were like, you know, this can be better. There's things that can change here. And so I thought about it, and I pulled back, and the things that I realized were, first of all, the poem needed to come to the fore. And having those 4 quadrants was visually distracting. Another thing I realized is that Donald Trump's presence sucks the air out of any room and makes everything about him. And putting his face on this literally was a mistake, because his face and present already inhabited it innately. None of it could have happened without him in the first place. So I knew he needed to go. The TikTok kids didn't feel right. The TV advertisement didn't feel right. That riot footage, that felt right. And so what I came to in terms of how to approach this was that those insurrectionists, their thinking has infected this country. The infection began in the early 90s, and it's just, you know, metastasized and become worse and more ridiculous as we move forward. And what I thought in terms of the concept was, I'm going to start this out with this idyllic family footage, this family vacation footage at our nation's capital, with our national monuments, all these things that represent democracy and what America ideally is, supposedly. And I'm going to show this infection rise up through that idyllic imagery and take it over. But I also wanted a type of hope to exist in the piece. And this is why I put that footage of the insurrection in there backwards. Because even though it rises up and takes it over, these insurrectionists are actually being sucked away to the dark hole where they existed initially and will hopefully go back to and exist in the future. So once I came across that concept, it became a pretty straightforward process of putting it together. I laid that footage in there of the vacation. The footage was already old and wonderfully distressed, so it had burn holes and mold on it and all these kinds of things, so I didn't have to process it very much. I manipulated it and cut it and did things to it and cropped and got it to look the way I wanted it to look. But essentially I used it as is, and I ran it forward for the first half of the piece, and then I inverted it and ran it backwards for the second half of the piece. That's the overlayment and then the underlayment of the entire piece. And then while that was happening, I took this riot footage, which also has graphics and layouts of buildings and all these other interesting things going on. And I took that footage and I processed it and made it kind of yellow and sickly, and I decided to, as I mentioned, run it backwards, and I started it underneath that image of the idyllic vacation and allowed it to gradually seep through.
America, this is the impression I get when alone in the woodshed. In America, you've made all truths relative.
That's the way it happened for America. I wanted to make you something beautiful, but I failed. So I hope, although I failed America in making something beautiful, I at least made it something true and useful. I guess we'll keep that hope. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my thoughts on video poetry.
I had the privilege of working with her on the award-winning John Walker story. The powerful one-hour documentary that witnesses and celebrates young Kwakwaka'wakw artist John Walker's Green as he carves his way home to the village he was forcefully adopted out of as a child. To return to John Walker's story was also an investigation into the adoption policies of the BC government, which had tragic consequences for the children it was meant to protect. Annie Fraser Henry received the honor of Aboriginal producer, writer, and director of the 21st century, presented at the Aboriginal Visions and Voices Symposium. Her films try to reflect the importance of tradition within today's way of life. She's constantly exploring new ways of making the old teachings and stories relevant to a modern generation. Annie Fraser-Henry.
These are prescription sunglasses so I can see everybody out there, but I don't need to because I just did. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. It was an honor to work with you. It's an honor to be here and be included in this magical symposium, and all the beautiful people that Tom works with are just fantastic people. I'm supposed to go louder. And yeah, everybody's been great. I feel like I'm having a renaissance. All of a sudden, the poetry films that I made many years ago are being shown everywhere. It's like I'm suddenly relevant again, and it's great because I can say my poetry films have recently been shown. I've been writing lately. I'm not doing films. A lot of films we have made, they've been shown, and it all comes back to the poetry films. A long time ago, I took a workshop with a very incredible writer and filmmaker who said to me, Annie, if you can write a poem about the film, the story, the script that you are about to do, you will understand the piece you're going to make. Because within the poem, if you can put it all in a one-page poem, you truly understand your story from the inside out, because the basis of everything we do is found within the poetry of distilling it all down to that abstract. And not doing it to define, but to defy, to really not become attached to that poem, but really, if you have an idea and you're doing long form, and you can just take it down to that prose, to that poetry, to that spoken word, you truly will understand what it is you're about to write about. And it's so true. It's so true. I know the poetry film that I'm so honored to have Tom show. I can't believe he resurrected me from the grave, but it's so, I mean, now when I try to get a grant to do a poetry film, which is my favorite of all, they say I'm not emerging enough, whatever that means, but that's the phrase they use. You're too emerged. So I guess I'm an overly emerged person, but my grandkids don't think that. The creative process isn't the point of the creative. It's really nothing that you can really define. It's about defying definition, not trying to define what you're doing. And I just remember reading quotes from Stein and Henry Miller and Pablo Neruda. And I mean, were they bold enough to try to define the creative process? I don't think so. I mean, that's just what's so beautiful. We can sit around, we can discuss this. I mean, it's ancient, and learn so much more rather than trying to define it. And the poem I'm going to recite for you today is, came out of Elijah Harper and the Mishlake Accord and, Kanawake. And there was a series of poems that I wrote that ended up resonating. And I performed for Elijah Harper. It was like a command performance. I was so nervous. And I was sort of enthralled with Pauline Johnson. We found her tombstone in Stanley Park. I really literally hauled my now 40-year-old daughter, who was 4 then, to Stanley Park, and we wore gloves and we clipped away her where she was buried in Stanley Park. There it was, Pauline Johnson's tombstone with her face. It was just so amazing. But the thing about it is that Pauline Johnson really started poetry performance in this country, of our great country of Canada. And she was what they called then a platform performer. She had her costumes. She was like the Marlene Dietrich of poetry performances. And there was a movie called Blue Angel where Marlene Dietrich traveled around, and she was a platform performer who did these, had a dresser and performed. And Pauline Johnson traveled to England and did poetry performances for the Queen and the King. And she brought her costumes and her regalia, and she dressed in aristocratic, fabulous clothes and had tea, and then transformed into a performance poet. She even drove her own stagecoach across the country. She would take the train and stop at the platforms along the way, and her dresser, who had a big crush on her, and that's another story. I mean, that's not the story we're telling today, but would dress her, and she had all these wigs, and would do poetry at Dumont's bar in the Big Muddy for all the cattle wrestlers who, when Canada was still the last threshold for all these guys driving, cattle. They'd rustle it across to Canada and then rustle it back into the States. And they'd all hang at Dumont's bar down there, and she would show up and do her shows. So I'd like to honor Pauline Johnson with this poem today. I really would. This is a poem that we wrote after Mish Lake and Kanawake and Tom showing the film. And it's called Visions. So just bear with me, I'm so nervous. When I talk about Pauline, I'm not though. I don't want to see stars in my eyes. I want to see stars in the sky where they belong, shining. Each solitary wonder facing the earth, reflecting their strength to those below. Gazing, midnight dreamers, taking no shortcuts. We know the way home. We divided highways stretching beneath our feet, striding the broken line, the broken arrow, the broken promise, still waiting to be fulfilled. Long awaited, we stood still, only to see blank faces, shaking their heads, left to right, eyes shut. We hear screaming. In the pitch black silence, we returned, turning back again, again. Hey, you make me smile. There's invisible feathers in your hair. They fly in the wind. Wherever you go, strength follows. Faces turn. People listen. People talk. Dreams are shattered. Dreams come true. Dreams are real. When you enter a room, there's invisible war paint on your face, and it looks good. Quiet. Shh. Do not let them know that we are here, moving up, revving up like a flame, a fire. Hey, let's take over. They'll never know. They'll never know. They'll never know. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. That film was made at the Banff Center, and with Sarah Diamond and everybody up there. It was a collaborative free-for-all, and it's playing for Tom. And it won. Lawrence Ferlinghetti gave it an award, which was really cool. Thank you, baby. Me, I'm relevant.
You are. She's emerging. She's emerging. I never said her middle name, but I will today. Fiona Tinwei Lamb was born in Scotland and has lived in Vancouver since the age of 4. She's got a long publishing, authoring list. I'm just going to skip to the good parts. Plastic Poems, which is on view in our exhibition, won the Judges Prize at Houston's Real Poetry Festival in 2020. It was also screened at the Cadence Videopoetry Festival in Seattle, which is where I believe I first saw her work. She's been shortlisted for the City of Vancouver Book Prize and other awards. Her poems have also been featured thrice, she writes, with BC's Poetry in Transit, which I guess could be called a repeat of my 1979 Poetry on the Buses in Montreal project. Please welcome Vancouver's 6th Poet Laureate, my good friend Fiona Lamb.
It's such a pleasure to be here today, and forgive my shouting, but I want to make sure that everyone hears me right to the back of the room. So if we're speaking face to face, I won't talk this loud, I promise. Anyways, it's such a pleasure to be here and such an honor. Thank you so much to the Surrey Art Gallery, to Jordan, to Reese, to all the staff and the team, and of course to Tom, who organized an incredible retrospective and organized this incredible symposium as well. I'm really honored to be part of it, especially because I am a lowly page poet. And I have done these poetry videos and video poems, which are different, according to Tom. They are different because of my collaborations. And I know that Valerie and Daniel will be talking more about collaboration, so I'm kind of a warm-up act for them. But I wanted to talk about the plasticity of poetry. How many of you are interested in making a poetry video or video poem? How many in this room? Okay, quite a few. All right, some of you are going, let me see. After the symposium, I'll decide whether or not I want to do one. I hope you do. I hope everyone in this person in this room will make a video poem if they haven't already, or a poetry video for that matter. So I've made a number of video poems and poetry videos in collaboration. Here are some examples of the more lyric, narrative poetry videos I've done. From my very first one back in 2009, and they've used live action, they've used rotoscopic animation, line drawings, sort of puppets, stop action animation. Mary McDonald, a wonderful poetry filmmaker, very talented, collaborated with me very patiently over a number of years to work on something that sort of borders into video poetry and probably is a video poem. It's an ode to an ordinary thing, which is utility poles. And it has been screened in Copenhagen as part of the Nature and Poetry Film Festival. But I'm not going to show you those. I'm going to focus on these 3 video poems and poetry videos. And you can decide which one is which category. For a number of years now, since, I don't know, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, I've been trying to go zero waste. And I've been very obsessed about plastic pollution. And I've been boring my family to tears and boring my friends and colleagues ranting on about plastic pollution for some time. And I was trying for many years to write a poem about plastic pollution, and they all came out as kind of angry rants, hectoring stuff, and ultimately they weren't really working as poems in my view. So then I decided I would try to make them into poetry videos, and I gathered some footage and material and facts and quotes and so forth, figuring that I could somehow communicate what I felt through text and images, through poetry video and video poems in a way that would be effective without banging people over the head and turning them off. So the first thing I did was try using concrete poetry. And as a lyric narrative poet, I had not really experimented very much with concrete poetry, of course, 1950s and 60s. I loved B.P. Nichols' experiments and so forth. So I tried using, as we know, plastic, 98% of it is made from oil and gas. And so, of course, it's very bad for the climate. There's also 400 million metric tons of plastic waste every year that's produced worldwide. The U.S. is the biggest plastic waste producer. So I wanted to use the sense of repetition and irony and hypocrisy. And I tried doing this with just basically centering words on a page and using repetition about going to Choices or Whole Foods and seeing all this organic food wrapped in plastic. And then I tried using word art. It's a program where you can twist words around, and I did something with words that are made from the letters of the word plastic. You can make 47 words out of the letters in plastic without repetition, and did it that way. And of course, we ingest plastic. There are plastic fibers in our lungs and our spleens and our kidneys. There's plastic fibers and placentas in babies. There's 94% of water samples in the US have plastic in them. So this one is the basis of the first poetry video poem about plastic pollution. And it started out simply as just doing words with repetition in a kind of a circular shape centered on a page, and sometimes I have an outline around it. But I decided to turn it into a video, and with this video you can see the contrast of just the poem, the word on the page. I showed some of these concrete poems to someone who doesn't read poetry, and she said, "I don't get it, what the heck?" And I thought, boy, I want to communicate this. And so the way to communicate it was the way some of these wonderful speakers and poetry video artists have talked about, with choreography, with movement, with gesture, with color, with pattern, which transform it. So there's this whole choreography here that changed the poem into something that is this.
Plasticnic. Open plastic hampers. Pop open plastic lids to plastic clamshells. A convenient feast huddled within. Sit on plastic chairs around plastic tables draped with plastic. Use plastic spoons to heat food on plastic plates. Devour it with plastic forks and knives. Pour soda from plastic bottles into plastic cups and suck it up with plastic straws while the baby suckles on a plastic soother. Later, wrap all leftovers in new plastic. Or scrape them into old plastic. Carry it all home in plastic. Then take plastic out of plastic to put on plastic shelves in the plastic body of the fridge.
So, well, that's thanks to an Emily Carr grad, Tisha Deb Pillai. I saw her work at an animation festival in Portland. I was so impressed by her use of color. So I approached her and I said, I have a vision of doing a poetry video with a picnic blanket and fridge magnets for credits, because of course there's this benign plastic, right, that kids play with, and having a fridge that opens up and having a mandala, a circling mandala that shows this accumulation of plastic items. And I would love to do stop action, but that's very time-consuming, expensive, and so forth. And she said, I can do that. And she's the one who made this wonderful choreography, because it's sort of like a gambling wheel, right? The way it sort of keeps turning and switching and so forth. So there's a wonderful synergy that happened in collaborating with somebody, and she understood what I was talking about. So I'm going to show you two of these more concrete plastic poems. This one is Roll, and I wrote a big rant about plastic, and I've actually performed it where I sort of rant plastic and there's an adjective, and I say plastic and there's another adjective, and so forth. And I thought about, I could have someone sort of wrap me in plastic, but then what would I do with all that plastic afterwards, right? All that saran wrap. I have to reuse it. But in any case, so a friend helped me with Photoshop to turn it into a spiral. And I love this spiral because, of course, it's a very ancient concept. We think of, ocean plastic, the gyres in the oceans and so forth. And then I also I played with word art to make the word plastic disintegrate, and I moved it around, and I was playing on the ferry for 2 hours, moving things around, and my coffee got cold and everything. And I dedicated the poem to Charles Moore, who's captain of a research vessel that discovered the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is the biggest plastic gyre in all the oceans. Anyway, so I wanted to turn these two into a poetry video, and I approached another recently graduated student from the Art Institute, which no longer exists, and I said, this is my idea, and I had to explain it and draw pictures and so forth about disintegrating words and spiraling words, but we had to make it more engaging. I tried to do audio recording of it first. It was me being really angry and going, plastic's bad, kind of a voice, and ultimately, when I listened to it, I thought, this is very distracting. The text is what's interesting, what's happening to the text, the texture, the motion. And so I decided to take my voice right out of it and just have the sound of water to create that juxtaposition. So, you don't have to. I cut that one short because you got the point. So then I thought, I don't know if people are getting the point. I did the plasticnic one, which is a combination of plastic and picnic. Thought I need to do something for Christmas. And so I had done this kind of, kid-like, paper cutout tree one as Christmas cards with red and green about plastic. But, people, again, weren't quite getting it. So this one is rather obvious and overt. I worked with 2 students from a Portland animation class.
Mary. Plastic, coated plastic, wrapped in plastic, yoked with plastic, sealed in plastic, carried home in plastic, unwrapped and rewrapped in plastic coated paper, sealed with sticky bits of plastic. Placed under plastic branches of plastic trees. Then plastic, 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 in the plastic-lined plastic garbage bin.
So that one, really the whole point of it was to have that last scene actually with the garbage bag taking over. So that one's much more explicit and probably more a poetry video than a video poem. This one, though, is this last piece I'll show you. That Mary one was just made over a week in the summer. This one was made this summer as well. So I think this is the first screening of Mary ever, and first screening of Neighborhood in Canada ever, North America ever. So this one, I met these 2 filmmakers, Pam Falkenberg and Jack Cochran, in Texas at the Real Poetry Festival in Houston, and I really liked their live action work, and they approached me and said, we saw this poem that you shared on Twitter, and we'd like to make a poetry video or a video poem about it. And I said, okay, it's a 20-year-old poem, but sure. And they saw it, this poem that had been about isolation and alienation, as a poem really about the climate crisis. So they worked on this poetry video, and they had incorporated text into the scenes of static, which you'll see in this poetry video in a second, or video poem in a second. And they showed it to me, and I said, actually, I don't think that's working, because the poem's a very short poem, and you scatter the phrases around, you don't get it. And actually, my poem has actually been absorbed. You have absorbed the words into your images. You don't need my words as text at all. It's very redundant and unnecessary. So, my view is the text shouldn't be there at all. So I suggested that there might be a point in the video poem where it might be interesting to have a short narration. So if you watch this, you'll see where it happens.
It is unbearably hot in India right now.
France had an exceptionally dry winter, followed by a springtime heat wave.
London's green fields and parks are barren and brown.
The sun continues to beat down in Italy, with temperatures rising beyond 45 degrees Celsius. And in China, officials have issued red alerts, the highest in their heat wave warning system.
Spain is doing the heat after temperatures soar, with some areas reaching a scorching 44 degrees Celsius.
The Arctic is warming twice as fast as anywhere else. A fragile ecosystem is being lost.
Fear is mounting for the frozen continent, with new data today revealing the Antarctic ice sheets disappearing at a rate never seen before.
Across the American West, there is a drought so vast it stretches from fire-ravaged California to dry lakes, rivers, and wells in Utah, Arizona, Colorado, and Nevada. Historic drought is the perfect fuel for these epic conditions. But it's climate change creating infernos larger than ever, with vortex of smoke powerful enough to spawn their own weather system. This is a new study shows that the record rainfall across Germany and Belgium last month, you may remember those pictures, that was made up to 9 times more likely by the climate crisis.
Running out of time. And it is communities of color that will bear the brunt.
These geometric days, bounded by brush-cut grass. Amputated maples lean lopsided into a sky incised by wire grids, nets for ephemeral connection. A satellite platter funnels a particle world into a cubed clone. We huddle before it, avid for evidence of life outside our intricate caves.
So basically, yeah, a really happy note to end on, right? By just a few points to cover. One theme can have many different treatments, plastic, many different treatments and styles. When you choose your poem, if you're going to do a poetry video or a video poem, look for imagery, the sequence of imagery. Of course, we've talked about from Sarah and others from Matt the importance of sound effects, whether to choose narration or not to have narration, whether to have sound effects, whether to have music. Also, the importance of juxtaposition, creating humor, irony, interest, and so forth. Those are all key points I would have you take away with. So thank you so much for including me today and listening.
Thank you, Fiona. Most instructive. Originally from Halifax, Nova Scotia, pluridisciplinary artist and writer Valerie LeBlanc worked in Canada, the US, Europe, and Australia. Her creations travel between poetry, performance, visual, and written theory. Homecoming, LeBlanc's first video, was collected and shown during the launch of the National Gallery of Canada in 1988. She's been publishing poetry and essays since the late 90s. She's got numerous books, which, are they here?
There's nothing there right now.
There's nothing there now, but there will be tomorrow at the reading in Vancouver. Her collaborator, Daniel Dugas, is a poet, musician, and videographer. He's participated in solo and group exhibitions. His 13th book of poetry, Emoji, etc., has been published by Edition Basic Bruegel Editions. In this two-part work, one in English, one in French, the texts intersect and complement each other. He's been an artist in residence at various spaces. The publications co-written with Valerie LeBlanc include Fundy out of Moncton, New Brunswick, where they reside presently, and the book Videopoetry, Videopoesie, which you could
The reading room.
which is
Down
in
at
the
gallery.
which is in the
At the gallery in the reading
at the
table.
gallery, in the reading area of the gallery. You've got to check it out. It's actually two books. It's volume 1, volume 2, a very special book on video poetry. Daniel currently resides in Moncton, where he was recently awarded the prestigious 2021 New Brunswick Lieutenant Governor's Award for High Achievement in French Language and Literary Arts. They will speak about collaboration. It's a very interesting aspect of video poetry because it has become so complex that sometimes one artist cannot do it all. So I'm inviting Valerie and Daniel, please come up and talk to us about la collaboration.
It's warmer here than over there. Over there feels like the old analog video suites. Keep them cool.
The refrigeration units.
You have to speak to the people in the back row.
The refrigeration units. That's where we used to work. So thank you all. Thank you, Tom. When Tom first asked us to speak about collaboration, we thought we should remind ourselves what it means. We decided to focus on some of the two-person collaborations that we've carried out. But if the conversation was expanded to include everybody here, each of us would probably be reminded of their own joint projects and partnerships that would fall under the concept of collaboration. Within that expanded concept, we might all find our relationships to the alliances that Tom put in motion when he decided to create the exhibition here. Thank you, Tom. Because we've been working together for over 30 years, some of the things that we will talk about today are things that we don't really discuss. We've absorbed them already. But that being said, we could think that maybe we would be thinking along the same lines all the time, and that doesn't happen. We sometimes find that we're working from opposite ends of the spectrum, and that's a good thing, because, and maybe it's a language thing, but maybe it's a good thing because it holds our interest and curiosity of working together. Helps it last there, I think. So we should mention that we still continue to carry out individual projects as well. And while video is a form of creation that can use a multitude of persons, poetry writing, of course, is mainly an individual gesture. And in the beginning, we wanted to work together, and we realized that if that was going to happen, we were going to have to figure out some kind of framework to work within. So we sat down to write scripts together, and some of those are still floating in our files, haven't gone anywhere.
So the first, when we set up that framework, was a limit production, and the E for the French. So that's always been a constant importance. And the first project we did with that was Slices of Life in 1991. 1990, 1991 was a short, it was a series of 5 short works. And that somehow kind of, we started working in series, and we are still working in series. It kind of allows us to work individually together. So that was it. Another way that we did collaborate was to apply to do our Master of Fine Arts degrees at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago in 91, 93. And and that wasn't done a lot. at the time to apply together to do something in an institution, but they accepted our proposal, and that's how we went ahead. So there we did a bunch of projects, but mostly like transitory, which was a multimodal installation, and in transit, which was a video poem series that we made cut and paste from our notebooks, and we revisited that project in 2019, and we did a new cut. So there's, working on projects, there's always a time where you kind of revisit stuff, and that was nice to do, actually, to maybe finish it correctly.
Yeah, to re-edit it.
Oh, sometimes we base the work on a quote from a writer, and we consider this to form a collaboration, not only with each other, but with the writer quoted. Pilgrimage from our Everglades series, video poem, uses a quote from David Henry Thoreau's from Walking, and the Everglades was a project that was stemming from an art residency, and this one in the Everglades National Park, and so we work kind of holistically, which means we need to see the macro and see the micro, and we don't go in those art residencies with a script, so we need to cover a lot of territory. We spend a lot of time hiking and exploring the place, and we actually see everything, the same location, but with two different points of view. And it's always amazing we see stuff very differently.
So when an idea arrives, there's usually a vision of the kind of media and direction that it needs. And usually only one of us writes the poetry or poetic prose, but each of us works on the proofing. And when we're invited to go out to residencies, we usually take 2 cameras and also a separate audio recorder. And in the evening, we'll go through the material and make notes and see what interests us in particular from what we've done. And when we get to the editing stage, there's sometimes negotiation around who uses what. There has to be some give and take, because when a work is completed, the visuals and the sound tend to create a certain branding. So if one of us uses a certain footage, maybe the other lets them use it, and nobody pursues that little bit of footage again. And Leaving Sao Paulo is one work that shows ways that we've collaborated. We each do sound mixes, and Danielle is also a musician. So for Leaving Sao Paulo, I wrote the text, and Danielle created the music sound mix and edited the video using footage that we recorded during the taxi ride out of the city.
That which digital media is gifted to creators, if there is a vision, it's possible to realize it, to have it voiced and seen. And Kurt and Heather talked about that. I mean, the older time, we have come a long way, right? But it's obviously the progress of our work collaboratively, collaborative work and individual work is linked to the progress of video production technology.
Is that a telescope?
No, it's a Portopac.
That's a
Portopac.
video cam.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the early 90s,
Telescopic lens, no doubt.
in the mid to late 90s, there was a lot of talk about the media accessibility, that it was coming, and it sounded good, but almost too good to be true. But in the early 2000s, it did come about that it was possible to do stuff in your home, I guess. It was really a time that presented some freedom from relying on technicians. We became our own technicians, artist technicians, and all the centers in that kind of top-down, tech-heavy legacy from the film culture had been chipped at by the artist-run centers at the 80s, which were offering then top-of-the-line analog video suite. And but then you still had to stay close to home if you wanted to take advantage of those advanced technology. The real breakthrough really came about with the advent of the digital camera, which then you could edit at home. And this was this is still from Google, but it was our first digital camera in 1999, 2000. And we wanted to take a picture of it the other day, and finally we took a Google picture. It was too complicated. But we were like, how do you open this thing? We couldn't find how to eject the thing. We had to look in the manual, which we still had. Funny.
So the internet and the global video community really has created accessibility and speeded up the process of getting ideas out, of being seen and being heard through festivals, websites, and forums. We started out as visual artists, and at that time, the visual artists had to take control of all aspects of production, from idea to finished work. And it shaped the way we work when we started to work toward independent video production as well, and it still does. So we fit into a category of the artist entrepreneurs, and we've learned to work within a structure that could be called a PME, a petite et moyenne entreprise, or a small to medium-sized business. So some of our video poetry projects have characteristics in the structural example of Georges Méliès. He probably best represents the example of the artist-entrepreneur concept. In addition to important contributions he made to film development and experimental editing, he reinvented himself many times during his career. So when we met, we'd already been working as artists, exhibiting and starting to create video poetry projects. I started art school in the heyday of conceptual art, and then I left to get a job, and mostly labor jobs, for 9 years before going back to school. And when I went back, it was in a hot glass program. Studied to be a glass blower, actually. So by the 4th year, I became more interested in surface of the glass and cold working. And after that, I quickly moved through various other forms of plastic arts before starting to work with moving pictures and sound. I was really ready to get out of the studio and get away from the sawdust and the smell of the paint. And I wanted to work in nice, clean electronic suites. I also wanted to have more dialogue with other artists and public audiences. And when I first approached the idea of working with moving pictures and sound, I wondered if it would be possible to make the leap. I'd been working with text in drawings, sculptures, and installations, but before making the switch, I was questioning whether my ideas would work when animated on the screen. And it really took a leap of faith to do that.
I always wanted to really experience everything and to touch as many medium as I could. And one of my earliest childhood memory was of my mother giving me jars of water and food coloring, and the game was to add the food coloring to the water and mix them up. So in a sense, I always believed in contamination or cross-pollination, and when I started to work with video and video poetry, it was a bit the same thing, like streams of text and images and sound could be included. It was like really playing with those jars of water and the colors. And it's kind of strange that today it seems that we've gone beyond the differences between painting and sculpture, between space and time, but somehow there's still I think it's W.J.G. Mitchell called him the purist of the disciplines. That there's still some, it's difficult for some people, but
it's reminiscent of the Age of Enlightenment.
Yeah.
Really, that's where it started.
Another way of collaborating, it's an element of our collaborative practice involves reaching out to French and English audiences. So I handle most of the French translations, Valerie handles the English, and we bounce the text back and forth in both language, and we find that something that is not clear is damn difficult to translate. So it actually helps us to work stuff through. And if it goes to a book form, then we get a third person and another pair of eyes to look at the project.
So we've often moved for our work, and with moving you get a certain independence during the process. But along with that freedom of relocating becomes the stigma of the uninvestability of the less well-known. So with the independence from belonging to institutions other than those of your own making, the responsibility of being out there can present challenges to finding your audiences. For example, if you're not a teacher or a student, you might need to begin your own PME. And here's how we dealt with being in between venues. We moved from Calgary to New Brunswick, and rather than waiting to get reestablished, we opened up an installation space in the trunk of our car. So some galleries were actually interested in the idea of us setting up outside of galleries during opening receptions for exhibitions that were happening inside. And we were able to exhibit some of our own work as well as several other local artists before winter conditions made it impossible. And that was back in 1996, 97. And the second iteration of the trunk was called Gold Rush, and it came in 1999 when we had invitations from the Artist Run Center's Hamilton Artists Inc. and the Eastern Edge Gallery. And we created Gold Rush. Danielle was gold and I was rush. And we brought the exhibitions to Hamilton, Ontario during the Aquafest and to St. John's, Newfoundland for the contemporary art exhibition.
The third and final event of the Trunk was the Trunk 75 in 2001. It was an exhibition organized to be set up in the parkade of the Alberta College of Art and Design in Calgary. And at the time we were teaching in the media arts and digital technologies at the college, and we were asked to instigate a trunk exhibition for the college's 75th anniversary. So the event was planned during the summer months, and it took place September 30th, 29th, 30th. And then the event of September 11 made it really difficult to go through the whole thing, but it was actually good. It provided the students, the instructors, the independent artists, and poets that were there, chance to socialize and through that time. So it's pretty good.
So the Media Packboard, or the MPB, was both a performance apparatus and a screening device. And in a sense, the MPB was an evolution of the trunk. The MPB unofficially ended in 2014 with the publication of the MPBX, which is 10 years of taking conversations to the streets. And we're going to leave that copy with the art gallery so that it will go into the Surrey Art Gallery library. And there's also a open access PDF of it online if anybody is interested. It's at that address. And Trunk and MPB do not directly fit into video poetry, although the MPB was a platform for performance/screening. But we're mentioning them because they are collaborations that we did that continue to inform our creative approach.
I think maybe we should skip the workshops. Yeah?
Okay, we're going to skip workshops.
Workshops were very important.
Another great idea for sharing things. We're going to skip that.
Okay, after completing 3 ecologically based projects in the south of Florida between 2014 and 2019, we wanted to do a project closer to home, so we decided to do something on the Fundy biosphere. And there's some overlaps with the projects, and here, before COVID-19 arrived, we had like 2 or 3 on the go at the same time. It was a bit. But the Fundy is an installation and a video and a book based on 15 video poems from material that we gathered in and around the biosphere. And there's also in the book a series of essays that we call capsules. And there's also an essay by the curator, Laura Ritchie, from the Mount St. Vincent University Art Gallery. And something very interesting happened, that we saw this is from 2019. We had astronauts, and this is the cave in which the astronauts went. And in 2021, we revisited some location, and that cave had completely flattened. And somehow we always kind of enjoy sharing our documents with people, but we got some kind of a keen sense of the value of those recordings when you see the erosion there from winter.
Yeah, and so anyways, we'd like to just talk about a little bit about the future of art. Where do we go from here? And we, in the sense of all of us, where are we going? Festivals that offer free entry do not usually offer remuneration, but they do represent chances to be seen and therefore to find audiences. So video poetry has both poetic and political potential, and there's a renewed interest in poetry, and in a sense it never really went out of style. But while free venues have a place, invitations to participate in exhibitions that pay fees place value on creation and the work of artists, and that is something that all artists need. And in August 2005, Wired magazine published a feature on the internet, 10 Years That Changed the World, and at that time there was still a lot of altruistic content. Today, when you open up any news article, a plethora of advertising custom matched to your search patterns is going to flood your screen, and it is depressing when you are reading about a crucial world event, a tragedy or an incident of war, infringements on human life, and those darling shoes or genuine leather travel bags are inserted into the story. During the confined period of the COVID-19, the banality of social media content multiplied. But it was parallel also to the rise of Zoom and other very useful tools. So currently with our own work, we are really back to those basic questions of who are we, where are we going, and what role should poets/artists play as social media platforms continue to roll out.
Oh yeah, Q&A.
Yes. Your name? I'm Brian, just local.
Just a local.
Yeah. Have you seen any work with video games and considered how the video poem can be kind of a foundation
Kind of,
for how
yes.
to include poetry?
Yeah, I did one time with one student that was using the, what is it called? The stealing of cars. It's that
Grand Theft Auto.
Grand Theft Auto.
My son is a gamer.
The stealing of cars. Grand Theft Auto. He was using that, and the way it was working, it was like it would go through a bunch of scenes where stuff was happening, then it would stop, and the character the first-person shooter would be standing there on the edge of a cliff, something like that. And I thought it was like a great start for video poetry. Kind of have it move through all the stuff and then stop, and then there's a reflection by the character. Yeah, I've seen that.
There was a group called eliterature.org has had lit crit studies of Grand Theft Auto going back maybe a decade when it was new, because they were looking at it as a form of literature.
Actually,
They didn't go into video, but they're sort of on your thread.
I created a poem game called Arteroid, which if you search for that, it'll give you results for asteroids, but it's arteroid, and so it's a shoot 'em up poetry game. You drive your text. You try and escape from being killed by these other texts. And then you create your own texts in Word for Weirdos.
Text for me.
And then
That's
say, shoot 'em up. So this is actually a game that is available online, Windows anyway at this point. There's some other games that I created as well. They're not video poems. They're computer art that have a poetic dimension to them as well. On my site, which is vispo.com.
Vispo.com, like visual poetry.
VISPO.
Very wonderful.
That's all of the
website.
program.
It's
Right?
all in there.
This looks
It's all
good.
in there.
Just Google
One
us.
more question. Can you come up with one more question?
It's all there.
Yes.
Have you yourselves been using social media as a way to get your work out there, namely short form content, like vertical short form content on TikTok or Instagram and YouTube? Have you seen that? Have you done it yourselves, or have you been seeing other artists using the platforms?
I've been trying to look into that further. I haven't had a time to investigate that further, but I just signed up for TikTok, so I'm kind of like leaning in that direction. So I know what you mean.
We're all of a certain age, so we started really early, so we're
Well, I did in 2009. I did something on the Twitter. It was a bot made with Maxim SP and an Apple script, and it did work. And what really made my day is that at the time Twitter was really cracking down on bots, and mine was fine. But now I just quit my Twitter account. So.
Pamela Falkenberg and Jack Cochran did one, tweet poems. Pamela and Jack, who, the last Fiona's last one, they did something called tweet poems.
Well, I know Instagram poetry is a big thing. I mean, a lot of people don't.
Yeah.
That's their introduction to poetry is through Instagram poets. It is what it is. It's okay. I mean, usually just use it to disseminate your work and stuff, but it definitely has possibilities. I mean, they're really interesting.
I will say that Fiona and I had a brief exchange on this matter just this last week, and I don't do it because I don't like surrendering the ownership of my art to the web service that is publishing it. I would much prefer to be able to exhibit it, and like we're doing in this situation, but it does narrow your viewership, obviously, but Facebook doesn't own the work I make. I own the work I make.
Yeah.
I'd just like to say a few words of thanks for my exhibition, Poets with a Video Camera, Videopoetry, 1980 to 2020, thanking Jordan Strom and all the staff here, all the staff there at the Surrey Art Gallery, including the technical assistance of Peter Courtemanche, for helping me realize a decades-long project. But first and foremost, Jordan Strom, who has seen this project forming for many years, his unwavering support throughout those years, and above all, his collaborative nature and expert guidance through the changes in the look and the presentation of what became a complex exhibition. Please join me in appreciating the indefatigable Jordan Strom.